doesn't have to end in a fight, Tony.
You just started a war.
I could do this all day.
Hey guys, I'm Philip Molina, and just when I thought I could not be more excited for Captain America Civil War, they released a brand new trailer that pulls out like every stop it could. Spider-Man, obviously, Ant-Man on Hawkeye's arrow. There's tons of new details here about the story and the characters. I'm gonna break it down, just talk about everything that you might have missed. I'm also gonna include some stuff from the Super Bowl commercials that we didn't get too into, and also, after watching this trailer, I might have a really big theory about what might happen in this movie. I also spotted something else that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about it, and it might be a really big spoiler, but don't worry because I will warn you when we get to those parts. If there's anything that you think I'm missing, there's a very, very good chance it's in our other Civil War trailer breakdown video. So check that one out after this one if you haven't, because that video has at least as much information as this one will. But now, let's dive into this freaking epic trailer.
This job, we try to save as many people as we can. Sometimes that doesn't mean everybody. But you don't give up.
So these first few shots show us an icy landscape and a remote high security facility, and right away there's some details here to point out. The guard's patch, that's a Russian flag, and it says Russia in Russian. So based on the look of things here and just some other clues, I feel like this might be Siberia, which is pretty much a place you go to die. It's also really hard to see, but there's a Hydra symbol on the back wall, so maybe this is a current or former Hydra facility. I'm wondering if it's actually the same location of that epic 2-on-1 fight scene that we saw in that last trailer. That was also in a pretty similar snow-covered cement structure. Let's talk about this shot of Bucky in this Winter Soldier armor and different kind of mask. It kind of looks like he's being defrozen here, and there's all this kind of dry ice fog stuff. There's frost on his hair and on his chest plate. This could all be related to that fog-covered yellow tank we see behind Cap in this next shot. But here's the thing with all that. There's somebody in that tank, and it's hard to tell who, and I know you might guess that it's Bucky, but there's some reasons to believe that it might not be, that I'll get back to later. But if we go back to that shot for Bucky for a second, also just note his metal arm, it doesn't have the red star, and that's either because it hasn't been put there yet and this is a flashback to like its origin or something, or maybe it's been removed, or maybe that's not exactly Bucky. But again, I will come back to this kind of crazy theory later. Let's move on.
New York, Washington, D.C., Sokovia.
Okay, that's enough.
Captain, people are afraid.
We then see this UN archive footage of the carnage from the past Avengers incidents shown to the Avengers by General Ross, who's definitely come up in the world since we last saw him in the Incredible Hulk. And these numbers on the side here, they show the financial damages, but they also show casualties. Here's the thing about the technical definition of casualties. A lot of people think that means deaths, but casualties actually refers to the number of deaths plus the number of people that were seriously injured. The reason they're counted together like that is because usually it's the military that uses the term casualties, and when they're talking about soldiers, it's a little dark, but to them, a seriously injured soldier is as effective as a dead one. So they just lump them together and call them casualties. Now, the reason I mention that is because if these numbers represent the numbers of people killed combined with the number of people injured, I don't feel good about saying this, but those numbers are really low, at least considering all the destruction we've seen. The epic Battle of New York caused $18.8 billion in damage, and only 74 people were killed or even injured. By comparison, the real-life 9/11 attacks in New York caused $95 billion in damages, and there were about 3,000 deaths. When you combine it with the people that were injured, so casualties, it's around 9,000 people, 9,000 casualties. The Battle of New York is considered one of the craziest things to ever happen in the MCU, and yet it hurt less than 1% of the people that 9/11 did. But if you don't want to mix movies and real life, you can also compare this to the Zod versus Superman battle in Man of Steel, because Bruce Wayne already told us in the Batman vs Superman trailers, thousands of people died in Metropolis. And again, that's not just total casualties, that's just deaths, and that's measured in thousands. So you can see why I'm a little shocked that we're only seeing 74 people were injured or killed in New York, 23 in DC, and 177 in Sokovia. But before you think I'm hating on the movie, I actually think these numbers were kept low on purpose. You see, in all of those attacks, thousands or some of them even freaking millions of people would have died had the Avengers not intervened. Unfortunately, the Avengers aren't real, so that's also why the numbers are so much higher in real life. But in their world, they were able to keep those numbers much lower. In the comic books, the event that causes Civil War, the Stanford incident, that got over 600 people killed and it wiped out a freaking elementary school. And just the way it worked out, the Avengers were not involved in helping in that situation. So that was a worst case scenario. Without any intervention from the Avengers, 600 people died and a bunch of elementary school kids. Yeah, after something like that, it's a no-brainer to think, well, yeah, the government should do something about this. There should be oversight. But here, not in the comics, but in the MCU, after years and years of attacks, far fewer people have been killed than would have been otherwise had the Avengers not intervened, and that puts us in a much grayer area. General Ross and Team Iron Man might have had an argument that any deaths are inexcusable, and the fact that Sokovia was the worst one yet implies things might just keep getting worse.
Captain, people are afraid.
So you can kind of understand they're wanting to add some sort of government oversight to this whole superhero thing. They're just trying to reduce the casualties. But Captain America and those who side with him, they might not feel comfortable pointing this out, but they have a pretty solid reasoning if they were to say it hasn't really been that bad. Like, not that many people have died. What I mean here is, like, technically more people have been killed by hippos each year than by superhero fights. So Cap could really easily argue that if it weren't for our heroes doing things the way that they do them, the death toll would have been way worse. So maybe they should just be left alone to do what they do. Be heroes. Get off their back, Ross. Anyway, that's why I think the casualties are being kept so low, because it makes it so much harder to swallow all this governmental crap than if the number said that thousands and thousands of people were killed each time. I think people would be like, oh yeah, no brainer, do stuff about that. The rest of the scene we covered a lot in our other trailer breakdown, but we do get one new moment I want to point out. When Cap tells Ross,
Okay, that's enough.
you can see that it's around the same moment that Scarlet Witch can't bear to look at the screens anymore, and that's when she's reacting to the footage of Sokovia. And that's because it's kind of easy to forget this, but it's only been about a year since that event, and that's where her brother died. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if General Ross just called that out to rub it in, like a freaking dick. Moving on.
That's why I'm here. We need to be put in check.
Here we get our first look at Black Panther, played by Chadwick Boseman, out of his vibranium suit, and he looks totally devastated in the aftermath of this attack on the UN, which I feel like is probably going to be this movie's main inciting incident. I get into that event in the other video, but regarding Black Panther, we know from the comics that the mantle of the Black Panther is actually passed down to him after the death of his father, the King of Wakanda, and if the movie's tweaking the origin a little bit, they might have made it so the King of Wakanda is actually killed in this attack, or maybe he's a UN delegate instead of a king or something, but nonetheless, this could be where his dad dies, which obviously would have lots of consequences, but let's keep going.
Whatever form that takes, I'm game.
I'm sorry, Tony. If I see a situation pointed south, I can't ignore it. Sometimes I wish I could.
Sometimes I want to punch you in your perfect teeth.
We then get a quick shot of what looks like it might be the Raft, which in the comics is a high-tech island prison, and it doesn't actually normally have anything to do with Civil War, because in Civil War, Tony Stark actually builds a new prison called Prison 42, and that's where he puts all the heroes that don't agree with him and the people who refuse to abide by the new registration rules. And yeah, things get very dark where he's sending his friends over to this prison. The reason it's not Prison 42 here in this movie is that that's actually kept in another dimension called the Negative Zone, and Reed Richards, aka Mr. Fantastic, is a big part of being able to access that place. And yeah, all of that stuff, Fantastic Four, Negative Zone and stuff, that's all owned by Fox. So they're not even allowed to use it in the MCU. We covered all of this and a bunch of other things that will not be in the movie version of Civil War in a different video all about what you're not gonna see in this movie. Check that out later. But anyway, for what it's worth, the Raft prison actually does look super cool. It kind of looks like a giant version of a Mac Pro. And as we learned from Azkaban and Harry Potter, putting prisons out in the middle of a stormy ocean is one way to trap very powerful people. Both of those prisons actually take their inspiration from Alcatraz, which is the real-life version of what was once considered an inescapable island prison. Now it's a place you can just wander around with your family and buy a funny shirt. Also, the inside of the Raft, that design is very specific. It's called a panopticon, and it was created by English social theorist Jeremy Bentham. And what's unique about its design is that it has all the cells facing inward. That way, all the inmates can kind kind of be watched at the same time. And because it's so secure, but also a terrible thing to expose people to, they love using this thing in comics. The kiln in Guardians of the Galaxy is based on this design. It's also the design for the Blackgate prison in a lot of Batman stories and in the Arkham games. But they actually use these things in real life too. There's like a few dozen of them that are in use today. Again, it's very secure, but it's a pretty messed up way to treat your fellow Avengers who just disagree with you. Can you tell I'm starting to lean toward Team Cap? And just before we move on, I'm going to point out that the discussion Tony and Cap are having actually reveals how they're going to frame this debate. I think they're modeling it after the real life debate over gun control, with Tony essentially acting like the way people do after a mass shooting and saying, look, enough is enough. We can't just let these things keep happening. We have to do something. And Cap is more like a gun rights advocate that thinks introducing legislation and constraints is only going to lead to it being harder to be a hero and to fight their enemy, and that maybe we should just trust them to act responsibly. I'm not going to say who I agree with in that scenario, but considering how charged a debate that is in real life, I think we're definitely going to see a lot of divisiveness in movie theaters, like between the audiences over who they agree with. Also, I did kind of think I knew how I felt about their debate, but then when I equate superpowers to guns, it does kind of change everything. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments about just this issue as a whole, but let's move on.
I know we're not perfect, but the safest hands are still our own.
Okay, and so we see more of this tunnel chase scene between Bucky and Black Panther and Cap, and now since the other trailers have implied that everybody thinks Bucky pulled off that United Nations attack, and here it kind of looks like Black Panther's dad may or may not have died in that attack, you get why he's chasing him down here. But it's important to remember, Bucky claims he's innocent, and if he really is, yet everyone still thinks he did it, that kind of adds credence to my theory that, maybe we're not dealing with the real Bucky. But more on that in a minute. Let's also just point out how freaking fast Black Panther is. He's outrunning Cap and he catches up to Bucky's freaking motorcycle. And did you hear when he used the sharp vibranium claws to pop the back tires? Just like Wolverine, you can hear the claws shinked out of his hand. Okay, but getting back to Bucky, we see this shot that is so freaking insane. We actually first saw it in the Super Bowl United We Stand trailer, where Bucky tries to shoot Tony in the freaking face. Like, Tony manages to block the shot, but look at his face. He's completely shocked that things just went that far. Based on his outfit, I think this was just a moment ago that he was joking with Cap about knocking out his perfect teeth, and then minutes later, Bucky's almost blowing his freaking brains out. Now, that not only shows how intensely things are escalating here, since that was definitely a shot intended to kill, not injure, but it could also be, I'm hinting at pretty obviously at this point, that maybe that's not Bucky. Like, I'm not saying that I know that for sure, but I am saying that it would make a lot of sense if someone who happens to look a lot like Bucky is the one who's willing to murder Tony here. And also, that would explain why people think Bucky is the one that blew up the UN. Again, it's completely just a theory that I just made up, but it would make sense. Also, while it's very cool to see Tony quickly assemble that portable repulsor from his wristwatch, it is making me think that we're probably not gonna see the full-blown bleeding edge armor from the comics. That stuff is insane. It comes out of his freaking skin. This still looks cool though too.
I was wrong about you. The whole world was wrong about you.
Next up, we see Cap running through an exploding building, and the editing wants us to imagine that Bucky shoots War Machine out of the sky, but that's actually not what it is. It's definitely a weird blast that hits him. Some people say it actually kind of looks like the Vision's energy beam, and while he's technically on the same side as War Machine, maybe he's not under his own control or something. Either way, this all happens during or shortly after that battle at Germany's Flughafen airport, so that blast could have come from anywhere. Like, everyone is a suspect. And considering that that is another shot that, in my opinion, seems meant to kill, knocking him out of the sky like that, let me know who you think fired that, because whoever it is not messing around. They're taking kill shots. Also, I still don't think this means War Machine is definitely gonna die, even though I think someone big will. I'm thinking actually about making another video that's just about my theories on who might die, so I'll save any theories I have for that. Let's move on.
They're coming for you.
I'm not the one that needs to watch their back.
This doesn't have to end in a fight, Tony.
Next, we see more of this attack on the Institute for Infectious Diseases, the IFID, and did you notice there's these electrical pulses that are running over the guy's leg and his chest, which makes me think that Black Widow is still using that same old electric disabler that she used on Winter Soldier in the last Captain America movie. Also worth pointing out is that Black Widow is fighting with Captain America here, but she's running against his team in a second. She's also arguing with Tony and telling him to watch his back. It's clear she's gonna flip from some side to another side and maybe back again, who knows. Scarlett Johansson said something like that is definitely gonna happen, and it'll be for very personal reasons, which doesn't tell us anything, actually. Also note that Tony's arm is in a sling, and his eye looks like it might be banged up here too, and since he's pretty much always got that black eye in a lot of the footage, I'm starting to think that it's all from Winter Soldier beating his ass when he catches him off guard earlier, since that fight is one of the few times that he doesn't have a black eye. And if that is the case, then that shot at Tony's head is not just some random attack. That's probably the first major attack that makes our heroes turn against each other, like the opening shots of a civil war. And again, if that person's not Bucky causing that, if that's somebody else, then somebody is really manipulating the hell out of our heroes. And I'll mention who in a second. Also, that moment where Cap tells Tony that this doesn't have to end in a fight, it reminds me of a really cool moment from the comics where in the middle of all the action, like everybody hates each other, Cap and Iron Man pause from the fighting and they have a secret meeting in this underground location that kind of looks like this, and it's a moment that is pretty important because it shifts us into a much more serious phase of the war. I'm wondering if that's what's happening here. Okay, and now a moment that could be spoilery if it turns out to be true, but just to be safe, I'm just gonna give you fair warning and say jump ahead to this time if you don't want to hear any potential proof about any theories or anything like that. Cool, alright, you had your chance. So here's the moment that actually started me thinking about this whole Bucky clone or Bucky imposter theory. Like, I know I've been talking about it a lot, but this moment feels like it could be legit proof of something like that, so I didn't want the other people to see it. In this shot where Iron Man backhands Cap and he goes flying, in the background there's this yellow, maybe cryo tank thing, and remember, we saw Bucky in something like that at the beginning of the trailer, and if you look at that tank now, it definitely looks like somebody's in there, and if you're like me, the first time you stared at that, you're like, yeah, look at his hair, that's Bucky in there. Definitely looks like that. But if you're freeze frame obsessed like me, then you notice this moment when Cap is flying through the air, and if you pause it just right, who's standing right there behind Iron Man but Bucky? So either that's not the real Bucky in that tank, or that's not the real Bucky standing there, but this is where I got that idea that there could be a Bucky lookalike running around, maybe one that doesn't have a star on his arm, and if so, that explains a lot about what's going on here. Like, that could be who blew up the UN, and that could be who was actually trying to kill Tony. And clones aren't new to the Marvel Universe, but they definitely, I don't think, have been done in the MCU, so we'll have to see if they actually went there. I'm also fully admitting that I can be totally wrong about this too. Like, that could be just a completely random person in that tube, someone unrelated to all of this stuff, but it did feel worth mentioning. Let's keep going. And okay, if you skipped ahead, welcome back. Quickly mention also, there's another spoilery moment coming up in not too much, so get ready to skip at that moment too if you'd like. Also, be careful in the comment section because I imagine people will be discussing these things down there. But moving on, more trailer.
You just started a war.
Okay, lots to go over in this section. We see some new weaponry from Iron Man in the form of little shoulder rockets, which really makes War Machine's rocket launcher seem so oversized, like it's an old school brick cell phone versus an iPhone or something. And then Bucky and Black Panther go at it some more. But the coolest thing to note here is that there's a massive machine gun firing from a helicopter, and those huge bullets are just bouncing off of Black Panther. That's what happens when your entire suit is made from the same stuff that Cap's shield is. Then you get more explosions. Scarlet Witch just totally owns Vision, but what the hell is she doing to him? It almost looks like she's yanking the vibranium out of him or something. Kind of like how Magneto once pulled the adamantium out of Wolverine's freaking body. But it also seems like maybe she's just controlling him with her red magic, which would be still crazy because he's got the freaking Mind Stone in his head, and if she can overpower that, then she's insanely powerful. But it would explain if she was in control of him, maybe she did make him fire at War Machine in that other shot. I don't know. What's sad is that back in Age of Ultron, Vision was the one that swept in and saved her, and in the comics, these two are totally in love. So if that's the case here, actually, then things are much more serious than just friend versus friend. You got lovers' quarrels here. Also, if you look closely, you'll notice two things. One, this is all going down in what looks like maybe Avengers headquarters. You see there's a reversed A logo, which means I think we're looking through a glass wall or something. But also, two, I'm pretty sure that's Hawkeye passed out there at her feet. That looks like kind of his arm and neck. So the question there is, did she do that? Or is she attacking Vision because he did that? Or is that not Hawkeye? Is that somebody else? But I think it looks like Hawkeye. Let me know what you think. But okay, moving on to one of the coolest shots of the trailer, Ant-Man riding one of Hawkeye's exploding arrows and jumping up through Iron Man's fingers. Anytime people think of Ant-Man joining the Avengers, this always comes up. Could he ride one of Hawkeye's arrows? Yes. This is such a popular thing. It was the cover of Avengers 223. We also saw it in an animated version in Earth's Mightiest Heroes. It's very cool to see it here, but especially because I love it when our heroes use each other's powers in collaboration. Love that stuff. This is a more damaging attack than it looks like because we know Ant-Man could shrink down and get inside of Iron Man's suit, so he might actually be causing some real trouble here. This is also probably a good place to point out that there's a rumor that Ant-Man might appear as Giant Man at some point in this movie, and that would also be amazing to see, especially as part of like this battle right now, like a freaking giant just stomping and like blowing things up. That could be amazing. Then we get a nice clear image of Crossbones, and it's actually from the fight scene that had pictures leak a long time ago, but it is still cool to see it here. I'm still curious what role Crossbones is playing. There's a good chance he's involved in the plot to frame Bucky maybe, but also we still haven't seen Baron Zemo, so maybe he's working for him actually. In fact, that's who I was mentioning earlier, could be just pulling the strings on this whole entire thing and we just don't know that. Considering that the entire storyline there with Baron Zemo and Crossbones and all these bad guys is still completely up in the air, and this is probably one of the last trailers we'll get. I'm pretty glad that we're still so unsure about what's gonna happen. As long as they leave it right here, there's still plenty to reveal. But actually, speaking of big reveals, let's look at the end of this trailer. Oh, and also this is the section that's gonna have a pretty big spoiler coming up, so get ready for that.
Stay down. Final warning.
I could do this all day.
At the end here, we get a little bit more of this brutal fight between Cap and Iron Man, and I think it's in that Siberian Hydra station, and Cap says this.
I could do this all day.
That's actually a callback to the first Captain America movie,
I could do this all day.
which is probably the last time Steve Rogers felt like he was getting beat up this badly. But okay, here is that potential spoilery moment, and I'm not 100% sure about it, but just in case you don't want to potentially know anything, go ahead and skip to this time, and I'll see you on the other side. Okay, for those of you that do want to know, if you watch incredibly closely this fight scene here between Iron Man and Cap, there's pretty much just a single frame here, but if you pause it just right, you see a body knocked out behind Cap. Now, all signs point to that being Bucky, since we've seen him in this same fight scene in the other trailer. But here's the bigger question. Is he dead? Like, he looks kind of dead. And dead or not, look at that image. It kind of looks like maybe his metal robot arm is gone. Like it was completely torn out. If that's the case, he's probably at least totally out of commission. But yeah, he could totally be dead. I don't know. Let me know what you think. I think it looks crazy. Let's keep going. And hello again to our time-traveling spoiler avoiders. We are picking up right in the action of the epic running shot with the two sides, Team Iron Man and Team Cap, just charging at each other full force. And I mean, look at Team Cap's nostrils. That is the definition of full force. There's a moment here in this wide shot that's a reference to a pretty epic cover from the Civil War comics, and I know when you compare those two images, it's a little bit of a letdown that they weren't able to get all the Marvel characters to have a family reunion in this movie, but honestly, it's okay. In the comics, the main storyline barely features anybody other than our main people, and you actually have to go into everybody else's own comic storylines to see how Civil War is affecting them. And I think we still might even be able to do that with the various Marvel TV shows, but here in this movie, it's gonna focus on the heroes that we've spent a lot of years with, and we're honestly probably gonna care a lot more about what happens because it's not gonna be too bloated. So I'm pretty happy with that. Anyway, did anybody watch this scene and kind of replace the music they were hearing with this music? If you know what that's a reference to, you really get me. Okay, and finally, the moment that everyone has dissected to hell, but that is not gonna stop me, the first reveal of Spider-Man in the MCU.
All right, I've run out of patience. On to roost!
Hey everyone.
I'm honestly not surprised that they got so much right about him. Like, keep in mind that it was very important to them that they not come off as just another one of the same exact Spider-Man we've seen for years in the Sony movies, and rather than make him look super different and weird like those supposedly leaked goggles that came out a while back, he looked even more classic. They went to the old school comics for his look. Yes, let's talk about the suit. The ones that the previous movie incarnations did always had some elements that I just kind of couldn't believe a teenager would have added. For instance, they both had that separate layer of raised webbing that I can't even begin to understand how you would sew that on. Like, I always imagine, like, is Spider-Man putting on a red suit and then he's climbing inside of one of those weird expanding orb things that you get at the Sharper Image? Like, this is just me because I suck at sewing and I can't figure it out, but maybe they were great at it. But that's not even a problem here because the webbing in this suit is just sewn in as black lines rather than some weird raised metal or whatever the other stuff was. It just makes sense here. The colors are also way brighter and more saturated than previous suits, but also it's a lot more colorful than anybody else in the MCU even does. Like in the movies and in the TV shows, everybody does a muted version of their colors, but this is the high school kid, like a really nerdy one at that actually. He probably doesn't think about subtle hues and fashionable choices. He's probably like, red and blue, those match, done. The spider on the front is also super tiny compared to the other suits, and it's pretty directly lifted from classic comics too, but also it makes logical sense that a teenager would design a super simple little spider drawing for his logo rather than these like epic stretched out versions from before. He's also got a utility belt, which is from way back. It's never been in the movies, but it's a good answer to where he keeps his web fluid capsules. You also get a great shot of those web shooters in action. If you slow-mo watch the one shot that's from above Cap, he uses one shooter to yank at the shield and the other shooter is tying up Cap's hands, which is pretty cool. Also, a lot of people thought the suit looked too smooth, or maybe that the CGI looked really bad. I think it's a combination of, yeah, maybe the effects works aren't totally done yet, but also we're seeing this trailer in a lower resolution than we will when we watch the actual movie. And if you look at the high-res photos of the suit, you can see it's actually got like a canvas-like texture to it. It's almost like a basketball skin. But let's also talk about the moment that this is taking place. It's part of the huge airport battle, and it's crazy that that is where he shows up because that battle already seemed totally epic. So now keep in mind, throughout that entire thing, there's gonna be Spider-Man just in and out too. And my guess is that he's gonna be fighting Captain America hand to hand. And after I thought about that for a bit, it actually made sense that he's in this fight. In the comics, there's an epic showdown between pretty much everybody, and while there, Spider-Man fights Captain America, and it's a big deal in that character's arc. And they even have the same moment where Spidey pulls away Captain's shield with his webbing. So this is probably the equivalent fight from the comic. It's actually one of the best fights in the whole story because Spidey has these amazing reflexes, but like I've mentioned before, Captain America might be the best hand-to-hand combat fighter in the MCU. So it's actually a really great match. And no, I didn't forget about the eyes. In the comics, that fight between Spidey and Cap is taking place not too long after Iron Man has given Spider-Man a brand new suit, the Iron Spider Armor. I don't think this is the Iron Spider Armor. I don't think they're gonna have that in this movie, but I do think that the same thing is happening here. Like if I had to guess, I think Iron Man has met Peter, maybe through his scholarship fund that was teased in an old promo. He finds out that he's Spider-Man. He sees his old ridiculous version of his suit. My guess is something that is like pajama underwear that he made himself, and that's where he would first refer to him as
Underoos!
And then Tony Stark takes it upon himself to make some improvements to it. Now, which improvements he makes are a big deal to me because I think Tony maybe made the eyes that can change shape, though maybe he did get Peter's input on it because they do seem to work mechanically like a camera's aperture, and Peter is a genius and a photographer, so he would know that. And if you listen closely, they even have a sound. It's kind of like a mechanical lens changing.
Hey, everyone. Come on.
So that all seems like the kind of contribution that Stark could have helped him with, but the web shooters? I don't know. We see them here on his wrists and they're strapped on there, kind of like teenager-y emo cuffs, kind of. I kind of hope they let Peter be the one to invent those, since that's supposed to be one of the ways that he proves what a genius he is. He figures out how to do this web fluid thing and make these canisters, but we'll see how they do it. Oh, and no, the eyes are not copying Deadpool. His eyes have always changed shape in the comics, and they could just never figure out how to do it in the movies in a way that made sense, but I actually think they've cracked it, and I think it's a pretty good idea. Mechanical apertures that close and expand would be really good for things like adjusting the ability to see in the dark or helping you focus on something far away. That's how a camera's aperture works in real life, and that said, I do think that they, like Deadpool, will use it to help convey emotions on his face, which was a problem with all the previous versions of the suit. They always had to unmask in order to be able to show any visible emotions at all, but I do think it's a mechanical thing here that they've invented, not some sort of just CGI thing. Anyway, I'm pretty thrilled with the reveal. I love that he sounds like a young kid and that he doesn't take this all so seriously, and that feels very in character for him. And this trailer was all around pretty great. I think they're in a really good place for this movie, and they should probably hold off on revealing anything else. You hear me, Marvel? We're good. You have our money. We've got all we need. But if you don't have all you need, go watch our other video about the other trailer. It explains a ton there too, and it goes into a lot of moments that weren't even in this trailer. Also, that video about what's not in Civil War is a good explainer for why you won't see more Marvel characters, and we even go into whose fault that is. Share this video around the spider web, pun, if you like it, and subscribe for more. We do this stuff always, all the time. To know about our new video releases and news stories, follow @NewRockstars on Twitter. To know more about me, Philip Molina, you can check out my new Facebook page, Fimo Knows. And if you want to have tiny conversations with me instead, maybe under 140 characters, you can hit me up on Twitter @Fimo. Now I need to go into a Daredevil binging hibernation. I'll see you on the other side of it. Bye.